Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Leibowitz. Today's guest is here to talk about the relationship between one's emotions and one's philosophy. He is a former prosecutor, he's an objectivist, an author, and he is the administrator of Ayn Rand, a chat room on Facebook. He is James Steven Valliant. He's our first return guest. Jim, welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show, I should say.
Well, thank you, sir. I am deeply honored to be your first repeat guest.
And I am deeply honored to have you. So, what made me want to have this discussion was I saw a very brief clip. It might have been 2 minutes on Facebook. It was taken out of obviously a larger talk that you had given. And it was about how a person's philosophical convictions can differ from their emotional responses. And it rang so true for me because of the dramatic change that I had to do to go from being a thug to being a rational human being. And it also rang true for me for the friends of mine who went through the same process. So within a minute of seeing this, I shot you off a message and said, I want you on the show to talk about this. And thankfully, you got right back to me and said, okay, we'll do it. So to start the whole thing off, what exactly is the relationship between one's philosophy and one's emotional responses?
Wow, big old question, but
Real big.
yeah, it is.
For
We
a
have
big
to.
guy that can handle it.
Well, I'll give it a shot. Consciousness has many, many operations. When I speak of consciousness in the broadest sense, it has many other operations other than what we call cognition, just coming to know something in the first instance. I perceive, I conceptualize what I perceive, and I use logic. Now, we can call that the cognitive aspect, the aspect that really consciously comes to know something. There is another concept that I think is really important here: the subconscious.
Yeah.
Not only are we constantly perceiving and processing what we're perceiving in a conceptual and logical way, although the conceptual level requires effort, it's volitional. Nonetheless, the products of those perceptions and evaluations and conceptualizations are themselves stored in our consciousness in a way that we can't necessarily always recall by will, but which is still being recorded sort of relentlessly down there. So there's a relationship between our memory, the things we can immediately access directly, and something even deeper, a memory that is sort of keeping tally of all the cognition that's going on and collecting the results. And emotion, according to Ayn Rand, and in fact, according to many in the broader field, Ayn Rand's ideas, I think, have had a tremendous influence in the field of psychology, where cognitive behavioral psychology has become, especially in the therapeutic clinical context, it's become the dominant thing in psychology. Recognizing that
Can I
human
say
beings.
something to you real quick?
Sure.
I've always thought about the similarity between the two, and I've never heard anybody else mention it until now.
Oh,
That,
yeah. In the 1950s, people like Abraham Maslow were famous for developing cognitive psychology, and a famous American psychologist. It's really hilarious if you think about it, because unbeknownst to the rest of the world, Ayn Rand was developing a very similar approach to, even in her first philosophical notes, when she was still in her 20s, written back in the early 1930s, I believe. She was saying emotions are a form of unrealized reason. And what she later came to understand by developing the characters and her understanding the characters in her novels, interestingly enough, and through her own introspection of herself and observation of others, emotions are the automatized results of our evaluations. If we come to think something, and the broader the thing that we think, the more generalized and the bigger, more territory and more facts it takes in, the more of an impact it's going to have on our emotions. Our emotions are a physical, automatized manifestation, if you will, of our evaluations. Now, those evaluations can happen in our childhood. Those evaluations can happen sometimes at a very subconscious level. At a very subconscious level. We might even at the subconscious level, it may not just be a storehouse, this subconscious, but it may also be doing some putting together of stuff and kicking it back at us in an emotional way.
Almost like osmosis, right? This occurs when you're a little kid.
Exactly. One objectivist psychologist put it this way, and I think it's very effective example. When I'm an adult, well, I'm a 30-year-old walking around, and someone treats me badly, treats me like a real jerk or something, I say, oh, that guy's just a jerk.
Yeah.
When I'm 4 years old, I don't have that wider context of knowledge. And so oftentimes the child, what's wrong with me? How am I bad here? Am I not getting it? Am I not worthy? Am I not good enough? And so you can conclude things about yourself, making evaluative conclusions about yourself or the world around you. Sometimes it's traumatic experience in childhood. Sometimes it's just the way we're normally treated by our caregivers. Sometimes it's the way our peers treat us and stuff. We'll draw evaluations that may or may not be reflective of reality. And so when we grow up and we think it through, and like, yeah, I don't rationally think that about myself. I don't rationally think that about the world. We're still feeling the emotions that came to us from those evaluations because we haven't reconsidered those evaluations from that context. And if you look at it, the entire field of psychotherapy is really just that, bringing to light that evaluative process you had made and uprooting it so that the emotion can be diminished over time and go away with the new thinking. Now, the relationship between emotions and thinking doesn't always require, in fact, may not usually require psychotherapy. Normally, as I have gotten older, for example, my evaluations of things have changed. And in the course of that, most of the time, my emotions have just naturally followed suit. There was no effort really in the course of it. When I have an emotion, I get angry at someone, or I get sad at something, or I get excited about something that's going to happen. I know the reason why. I can tell you exactly what the evaluation is in most cases, and that evaluation perfectly corresponds to my conscious evaluation, so that my emotion makes sense. I can rely on my emotion, go with that emotion, enjoy that emotion, use that emotion to motivate me, because that is really the critical function of emotions, right? They are a means of enjoying life. They're our means of motivation. But there are cases where the conclusion that you reach either as a child or at some other point because of, say, trauma or something is so ensconced, so embedded in our consciousness that we perceive a conflict between our emotion and our current thinking. But really it's a form of a conflict of two different thoughts. One is a frozen, subconsciously grounded in our subconscious sort of evaluation, and the other is a conscious, purely cognitive thought. But at the end of the day, it's a conflict between two thoughts, so that if you get rid of the underlying thought between the other one, your thinking is all brought into a consistent whole, your emotions will now manifest your current thinking and evaluations. Emotions are key here when we're talking about the subconscious, it seems to me. There's brain science behind this. Our memory centers of the brain actually go through the emotion centers of our brain. And there's a key relationship between emotion and memory. And they've done all kinds of studies on this. If you're not under much stress, if this is the same old, you've seen this a dozen times before, you're not likely to well remember the details. Oh, yeah, I've seen it all. As our stress level increases, oh, this is different. I've not seen this before. Oh, that's unusual. That was unexpected. Oh my, that's really stress. Uh-oh, something bad is happening here. Actually, our memory, it gets better and better and better. As those kind of stresses, we go up the graph on the scale of stressors, our memory becomes better and more acute, so that the evaluative salience of the experience or the memory is what the brain uses to remember, to prioritize the memory. Traumatic experiences or really wonderful experiences are going to leave really big, deep grooves in our subconscious as a consequence.
Yeah.
So people who've gone through war, people who've experienced criminals, who've been members of gangs, who've experienced a lot of violence, children who've been molested or abused, people like that who suffer actual trauma, they're the ones who are probably going to have the hardest time and may really need to seek psychotherapy to unlodge the effects of things like trauma or neglecting or abusive parent, something like that. But they can be overcome by our volition. It is our conscious, the truly cognitive part of our consciousness that it is in control at the end of the day and programming this. When I say in control, I don't mean that everything can be changed. Sometimes we have to, if something is so deeply and powerfully ensconced in our psychology, we just have to accept that that's part of our
Sure.
psychology. We're still in control of our actions.
Always. That's key
Always.
right there, because you might
I
have
like your post
emotions.
the other. You had a great post the other day just on that.
Yeah.
No matter what we feel, so long as we're short of being a psychotic, someone truly disconnected from
Yeah.
reality and seeing pink elephants, so long as we're not a psychotic hallucinating,
Yeah.
no matter how intense our emotions, we're still in control. Now there are practices by which we can become more comfortable and in control of our emotions and not be so reactive on those emotions. And I think a lot of people are undisciplined about that. That is an art, just
Yeah.
like introspection. Understanding our subconscious is an art,
Yeah.
but that's what we have to do. We have to practice introspection. The most important thing about all of these issues is taking the active step of not just looking out and figuring out the world around us, but looking in and figuring out the world within us. Does that make
So
sense?
it does. And I'm going to tell you why. And this is part of why this is so important to me, this discussion. I went to prison. The main charge I had was my girlfriend that I had at the time broke up with me. I was extremely jealous. I felt abandoned. I had wicked abandonment issues, and I ended up having her new boyfriend attacked, stabbed while he slept. I felt, because of what you said, when I was a little kid, my parents were very neglectful, and I incorporated that to be a reflection of me. And I didn't do the work growing up to say, no, it's not me, it's them. And so I ended up thinking that I was an unworthy human being. Two things, really. I'm unworthy. People are going to abandon me. And I thought that I had to stop that at all costs. So later on, I was in prison, and I realized that exactly how you said, from introspection. Because I'm asking, why am I like this? Why was I so jealous with every girlfriend I ever had, insanely jealous? And I started to realize it's my parents, it's this, and these emotions are still there. Even when I logically now know, okay, this was not me, this was my parents. I'm still having these feelings, right? So I went through this process every night. As I laid my head on the pillow, I went through this series of mantras. It wasn't me. There's nothing inherently unlovable about me. It was my parents. They had their own problems. They did their own, made their own mistakes. It was their issue, not mine. Not everybody's going to feel like that. Not everybody's going to do that. And also, I said, even if people do abandon me, I can take it. I'm going to survive. Now, here's the thing, Jim, and this is serious for me. While I'm dealing with this problem and coming to this realization, at this point in time, my mother committed suicide. So this was the ultimate abandonment, right?
How old
But
were you with it?
30, hold on, it was 2008, so 31. I was almost 32. I had
Oh my
been in
God.
prison, I think 11 years at the time.
Mom
And
died when you were in prison.
yes, and I got the call, and at first I was rocked, and I mean, it hurt, don't get me wrong, but something occurred to me. I survived. And
Yeah.
and what I was able to do was to kind of drill that into my head. Look, I've just survived the thing that I feared most my whole life, was this abandonment. If I can survive it, I can survive anything. Now, just coming to that realization immediately didn't get rid of those feelings of
Oh,
insecurity. That takes time. And it's
my.
still, I still sometimes it creeps back in, because, like you said, these things get embedded in the subconscious. But through a constant train of logic and comparing the evidence, is the evidence that I'm inherently unlovable? No, it's not. Whether I'm lovable or whether I'm worthy is a function of what I do, not of what other people do. But
Right.
that takes a lot of effort, but eventually it happens. The other thing I want to tell you, because I think you'll, as a former prosecutor, really appreciate this. My value system was so out of whack. You cross me, I'm hurting. You insult me, I'm so disrespected. You were not going to get away with that, right? So when you're in prison, when I was in prison and my friends that changed with me were in prison, and you say, okay, I want to switch that value system. And I'm entirely convinced that the entire change process boils down to changing values. And so, but just adopting those new values, now you're in an environment where still people aren't going to stop calling you a sucker and a coward and everything else. In that anger, it still comes and you still want to respond, and you have to talk yourself out of it. Just because I've come up with a new value system, just today I'm walking down the street and I was talking to my girlfriend on the phone, and these group of guys beeped to scare me. At least that's the interpretation. I thought it was funny to scare me. And my immediate thought was, if those dudes had any clue who they were dealing with. But that thought came in my head and I dismissed it immediately as irrational. It's who cares what these guys do? But the thought still came because it was so embedded in me, like you said, during emotional periods of my life. But by training myself, by training my thinking, one, I don't have to react. And two, who cares what those guys think or anyone else thinks? So I think that that's what you're talking about.
Yes. Yes, 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 yes. First, well, let's go back to where you say it started. You know, our relationship, going back to when we're babies and toddlers, and I'm going to go back that far, when our conceptual mechanism isn't yet turned on and when it's first turning on, honestly, it goes back that far. Our relationship with our primary caregiver or caregivers can really do all kinds of things in terms of affecting us. If there is, and attachment theory in psychology has very much explored this.
Yes, John Bowlby.
If we have an insecure attachment type, right? Or we're not really securely attached in a way. We have mother is distracted, mother doesn't talk to us, mother doesn't hold us. I'm not saying that this is going to, because I do believe that people can change. I do believe cognition is the thing that sort of programs our subconscious, but our subconscious starts getting programmed from the start.
Sure does.
From the start. And so attachment patterns, and I am no psychologist, and so I'm not going to ask any more details from you.
But you can play one on my podcast if you want.
Okay. Yeah, but I play one on TV. But the truth is, though, that without even knowing the details, I can tell you from my own experience and that of everyone else, these attachment issues will play out in our relationships in life.
Sure do.
I don't mean to reduce it to this like this, but how mommy treated us will have an ongoing effect if we, especially if we don't think about it and address it in our own lives. And at the other end of the thing, you there thought about it, willfully considered that emotion, then said, no, it diffused it in my mind. And in my experience with things like that, that voice gets less and less and less and less and less. You know, one of the things, and you make a great point about the criminal justice system too. You're heroic in one sense. We're putting guys and women into the most high stressful kind of situation and asking them, well, now consider how you got here and consider what your issues are. That doesn't seem to me an issue, an area, an environment conducive to, you know, calm introspection and coming to a fair view of the world at large, because it's a very different sort of world. So I think you're being particularly heroic, you and those who followed, were able to follow your path. See, it took some effort, didn't it, and some thought.
Oh my God, it did. And you know,
is the thing.
And something that irks me is this: like people have asked me. I did an interview recently, and someone asked me, "Well, why did you go to prison? What happened?" And I said, and I'm always hesitant to answer because I don't want to seem like I'm coming off blaming anybody. But the truth is the truth. And I grew up in a context, and I responded to that context. I didn't have to respond the way that I did, but I responded that way nonetheless. So an explanation is not an excuse. But somebody said to me, "Oh, you're making excuses." I'm not making an excuse.
Let's back up further. A psychology is not an excuse.
No.
We all have psychologies. And ladies and gentlemen, we all have volition. We all are in control of our conscious thoughts and actions. And so both can be true. See, this is the false alternative. So many, you know, psychologists had this insecurity against the physical sciences. And so they wanted to reduce everything to numbers or deny that consciousness exists, like the behaviorists at all, or just say it's merely an epiphenomenon that has no effect. Yeah. You know, the behaviorists, there tends to be this psychological determinism that people think is the scientific approach. So the question is, do we look at it from a moral perspective? Well, that's religion, that's old-fashioned, unscientific. Or do you have a scientific, clinical view of a person's psychology? On the other hand, the people who believe in free will and morality and will say, wait, you were still there, right? You're still in charge of your conscience. Both can be true, ladies and gentlemen. There's no contradiction. The fact that you have a psychology is neither an excuse nor some kind of credit. I mean, geez, I have this certain emotion, therefore I'm better. No. Emotions as such are really not subject to moral evaluation. There are automatic physical responses. Whether the evaluation is a healthy, good, correct, proper one or not, the emotion is an automatic effect of that. So the emotion as such can neither be blame nor credit nor an excuse nor a, you see,
Yeah.
both exist at the same time. Now, that doesn't diminish the fact that you went through something, you had an experience. That is the context. It's part of the causal explanation, not a complete causal answer. Free will is there because you still had a conceptual faculty, and you are a great example of how to use that conceptual faculty to improve your own consciousness for the better. And you are a wonderful example of how effort and thought and introspection can actually make a difference, and how Ayn Rand has such a wonderful line in Atlas Shrugged: man is a being of self-made soul.
Yes,
You
I
are a
love that.
wonderful example of that. And as I say, I, in my own life, when I've said, no, that's stupid and that's silly, and I don't want to think that about myself anymore, and I've just acted against it, holding the conscious thought in mind. And what I find is over time, that feeling just diminishes. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, it's an astonishing phenomenon. So there is a relationship, as I was saying, between our emotions and our memory, and that's an important part of the subconscious, I think. But there's also another important part of the subconscious, and that's what Ayn Rand called psychopistemology. Our subconscious is not just influencing our emotions, it's influencing the methods and the patterns by which we think. And what you went through is a universal phenomenon. There's no one doesn't have to address this issue in some form. Let me just throw that out there to make you feel a little more normal, to normalize this sort of thing. When I was a DA, I am an opponent of the drug laws. And I think one of the terrible aspects of our criminal legal system are that things like drugs, the mere possession or use of drugs, is illegal.
Sure.
That's ridiculous to me.
So
what I wanted to do, even when I was in law enforcement and on the side that was doing this, I said, well, why don't we find non-incarceration alternatives and so I helped start the first drug court in San Diego County. Yeah. Decades ago, I was a pioneer of drug courts in California. And by running the first drug court out of my courthouse, I worked very closely with drug addicts. And it was very interesting and illuminating on this very topic. People would come in and they would waive their confidentiality, and I would have to take an oath of confidentiality so they could share their stories with me. I could go to their NA meetings, or I could go to their therapy sessions and actually be part of it. And I learned a great deal. There are questions I would have, like, okay, Mr. Heroin Addict, if you're there and the cop is standing right there, no matter what you're feeling about your addiction, can you manage not to shoot up in front of the cop? Oh, yes, Mr. Valliant. If the cop's right there, I never shoot up. I can avoid that like that.
Sure.
And I said, well, what's the difference when you're alone in your apartment with your buddy? Why is it then that you are succumb to that pressure from your subconscious, the addiction, the habit, and the emotion that makes you want to do that? Well, I wasn't thinking, Mr. Valliant. So the cognitive awareness of the officer was able to say, no, I can't shoot up in front of the cop. But when that cognitive awareness goes away, the emotion and the habit stuff comes back to life and takes control. So why don't you start acting in your apartment as if there was a cop there? Because, you know, when you started drug court, Mr. Heroin Addict, you told me how you'd lost your girlfriend, you'd lost your job, you wanted to think straight, and you didn't want to get arrested again. So you hit bottom and you wanted to turn your life around. Why don't you think of that stuff when next time you have the urge? And one of the great words that the drug counselors gave me was, yeah, play the tape forward. Ah, ha, 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 ha. Thinking is the answer. Taking the effort and the focus, and effort and focus are about thinking, are what Ayn Rand means about free will. That's what she thinks free will is. It's that effort. It's that ability to focus. And that does take choice. And it's that kind of focus, directing your focus onto why the heck I don't want to shoot heroin anymore. All the things that I lost my girlfriend, I lost my job, I want to think straight, you know. Those kind of issues start kicking in, and suddenly they're like, you're right. If I bear that in mind and I act against it, now the ones who are successful, too often we had the tragic relapses, of course, and the young guy just didn't come back after the weekend because he OD'd, and it would break your heart, but that's a big part of it. The guys and gals who succeeded were the ones who were able to play the tape forward, and they'd come back and they'd say very much like what I'm saying. You know, it's amazing how the physical part of the addiction goes away. You still psychologically, if I'm under stressors, you know, oh my gosh, I've got trouble at work, or I just had an argument with my significant other. And then so these stressors come up, and then I want to do the drug, I want to do the drug. And it takes that cognitive suppression, awareness. No, this is bad for me. That cognitive awareness can reprogram our consciousness. And some of the most moving stories were 2 years later, the heroin addict comes up to me and says, Mr. Valliant, I want to thank you. It did. It got easier and easier and easier. And now I can't even imagine wanting to put that crap in my arm again. That's it, really, when you see people doing that and trying to turn their lives around. And oftentimes, especially, you know, you'll often hear, and this is another thing where you can, I say it's universal, my friend, and I'm going to back up to something even more universal. Arguing with people who believe in God, like a lot of objectivists end up having to do sometimes, or trying to avoid sometimes, but arguing with people who believe in God. It's funny because what you'll say is, okay, you say the existence, the universe requires a creator. Well, why doesn't the creator require a creator?
There's never an answer to that.
Look, you convinced me that you're trying to convince me that the whole universe had to have a cause. Yeah. You, as objectivists, we know that's silly. The universe is everything. There's nothing left over to be a cause of the universe. The universe is one thing I know cannot have a cause, because it involves everything and leaves nothing out to be a cause of it, right? So, no. But your argument is that the universe requires a cause. But if your cause is out there, then why doesn't it require a cause?
Yeah.
Simple question.
You end up with an infinite regress, and they
you know why? But why does the theist stop? He's happy to stop because it's a consciousness. My consciousness can be, the universe be eternal? Oh, screw that. This ruling consciousness, that can be forever, that can be eternal. So why is it that existence can't be eternal, but your consciousness? It's the primacy of consciousness, as Ayn Rand would call it. And what they've done is they've inculcated it into their mind, into their pattern of thinking, into what they find persuasive. So that when you ask them, why don't you stop? But they're, no, I'm willing to stop at this consciousness called God. It's because, for a reason they don't really even know, but it's what they find persuasive. And oftentimes what I find, and people have done this, they've gotten out of that mode. Why was I thinking that the universe needed a cause? Oh, I didn't really grasp the primacy of consciousness. I'd automatized this mode of thinking. I'd automatized this basic idea, maybe even without fully being conscious of it, but I'd automatized that as part of my thinking method. My thinking method. It gets, if you've ever taken Dr. Leonard Peikoff's course, Understanding Objectivism.
I did study the book thoroughly, but I've never taken the course. I was in prison. What could I do? I had the book. I didn't have access to the course.
I'm an old. The tape is still available, I think, through Ayn Rand Center, Ayn Rand Institute ARI campus, and it's great because hearing Leonard, his humor and the question periods are all worth it. I was there live in 1983 in New York City at the Roosevelt Hotel, taking that one live. That was my first live Leonard Peikoff lecture, by the way. I took the whole course. And the course is basically about psychoepistemological syndromes. Psychoepistemology, just to explain what that is, it's the relationship between conscious and subconscious when it comes to methods of thinking.
Yeah.
When it comes to methods of thinking. And what Dr. Peikoff delineates there are two psychoepistemological syndromes: rationalism, right? The preference for the abstract, right? Over the concrete, or empiricism, seeing only the being concrete bound and unable to really see the reality of abstractions. And the more abstract, the less real it is to the person. So you've got two kind of approaches that have sort of been dictated by modern philosophy and that are inculcated into us through popular culture, through education, and if you're unlucky enough to study philosophy at university as I was, through actual education of it. And so these methods become inculcated in us. And so what will happen is that we feel something is more persuasive. We feel an argument is more satisfying. We can't quite put our finger on it because, gosh, the logic, my concepts were clear, the facts were laid out. My logic was thorough. Well, let me review my logic again. No fallacies. That's right. I took everything into account. That's right. I'm being consistent. That's right. But somehow it just doesn't feel persuasive. Just doesn't feel right. What that is, it's an old psychoepistemological, an old methodological habit, if you will. See, moral character is an important thing, and Aristotle even understood this, right? When we act, it becomes easier to act the same way again. And the more and the more and the more we act like that, this is what we call habit, right?
Yeah. What was Aristotle's until it becomes second nature? That's what
he came up with that wonderful term.
Yeah.
Right? We're born with our first nature, but we develop our second nature through our own actions. See, in a sense, he was like a pioneer of cognitive behavioral psychology, even way back then.
Yeah.
You correct your thinking and you behave on that thinking, and suddenly it becomes part of you. Education, according to objectivism, is not merely having heard of something, because I can go in one ear, out the other. Yeah, oh, I heard of that. No, education is building it into ourselves, making it a part of ourselves. Not only does objectivism believe that knowledge has to be an integrated whole, so that you have to build that knowledge into the rest of your knowledge in an integrated fashion. We believe that every aspect of your consciousness should be an integrated whole. And more than that, emotions are absolutely vital. So we don't believe that they are helpful when it comes to logic. They are not tools of cognition. When it comes to this pure cognition thing, emotions themselves are not tools of cognition. On the other hand, they can be vital aids to cognition. That can help me conquer. Remember, if I let myself be emotional about something, it'll bring up the concretes. It'll help me be less concrete bound. You see, if I'm suffering from one of these psychoepistemological syndromes. But again, we have to rehabituate our minds. Dr. Peikoff describes how he got a PhD in philosophy at NYU, where the famous Sidney Hook was his dissertation advisor. Most of his professors were pragmatists, the leading American school of philosophy, and they were filled with all kinds of errors, particularly the analytic-synthetic dichotomy. And he really didn't know the full answer to that. And he kept getting pounded. There's a priori and a posteriori. There's necessary truth and contingent truth. There's fact over here and abstraction over here. In a sense, getting a PhD at NYU had inculcated him so that he had to that he'd go talk to Ayn Rand, where it's just the exact opposite and just total nonsense as far as she's concerned. And if you have that approach, you're not even thinking the way she's thinking. So he said he had to run a sort of mental split screen. He would go talk to Ayn Rand, who would answer the questions that were building up as he was getting his PhD. But we go back over to the PhD and then have to talk their language and convince his professors that he understood their theory. So that sort of meant in his mind a mental split screen. And what he had to literally do is, by an act of volition, disintegrate the bad idea in his head, cognitively knowing it was false. And you can only do this when you're cognitively certain that this old idea is bad and wrong, and you've thoroughly convinced your mind this is an error. but it's still coming up. You're still having that feeling, even though your mind is fully convinced. And I mean fully convinced, you're still having that tug. That's not convincing. That's not persuasive. Or have this feeling, this reaction to something, as you were saying. It's going to have to take thinking and acting against it to disintegrate the bad idea, to get it, to flush it out. Or if I could paraphrase Yoda from Star Wars, we must unlearn what we have learned, in effect. And when we've really learned it, if learning really is building it into ourselves, automatizing it, then it needs to be excised from our integrated consciousness. It needs to be excised from our emotions through thinking and behaving against that other view. So it can be an effort, a real effort, but our consciousness at the end of the day has way more control over our subconscious than people give it credit for.
Yes. Well, we've been talking so far about how hard it is once you change your thinking to get the subconscious and the emotions to follow. But sometimes it's immediate. You told a story on Facebook recently that I found so powerful that I shared it with other people that aren't even that are just personal friends, aren't the Facebook circles. I thought it was wonderful. And it was the story about how you were really down and kind of feeling bad for yourself. Do you know the story I'm talking about? Because I would much rather have you tell it than I tell it, because I think it's a phenomenal example of how just changing the way you're looking at something can profoundly alter the way you feel. And it was just such a wonderful story.
Well, thank you very much. It was, I think, an 11 or 12-year-old post from Facebook, and it didn't come up as a memory or something that I reposted. It was a friend of mine who'd gone through old posts and had just reacted to it, and so the algorithms kicked it back into everybody's news feeds.
Oh, wow.
Completely by accident. A 11 or 12-year-old post came back in. Now, to give you the context, since I was 11 years old, I wanted to be a lawyer. And I wanted to be a lawyer. I loved Perry Mason even before Ayn Rand. I had ever heard of Ayn Rand, and she recommended it. I loved the old Perry Mason show. I wanted to be the guy in court doing justice. And from a relatively early age, I was lucky. Not a lot of people know from an early age what their career path is, and I was just fortunate enough to just glom onto this image, and it seemed exciting. And there were reasons. I mean, when I was a kid, injustice meant a lot to bullies. I didn't like bullies. I had my one physical fight interaction as a kid was with a bully who was bullying this other kid, and I gave him a bloody nose, man. And I myself was kind of traumatized by that experience.
I
So
hope you didn't initiate force in this thing, though.
I wasn't the initiator
Okay.
at all of the physical force. And besides, it was the climax of a bunch of semi-physically intimidating and totally verbally humiliating things to a small child, to a smaller and younger child, too. And it just... So, look, when I got a chance, I gave the guy a bloody nose. And it was a very emotional impact on me because I was a kid. So I had these experiences as a kid that made justice real to me. And Perry Mason was a hero. Went to law school, and I clerked at a big law firm in downtown LA, a place called O'Melveny and Myers, huge downtown law firm. And I realized I did not want to work for a big, huge downtown LA law firm. I wanted to be the guy in court doing justice. And, even Leonard Peikoff asked me once in his living room, he said, Jim, you seem to understand this objectivism philosophy thing. Why don't you go be a philosopher, get your PhD and teach philosophy? And I said, Leonard, you're not going to see the effect of your work until long in your lifetime, not till long after your death is it really going to have its impact, and you'll never see it. I need to see in my life the immediate impact, that guilty, and the effect of it, doing justice in real time. And he said, I totally understand that. And he perfectly accepted that. I loved my work. I loved going to work every single day as a prosecutor. And I enjoyed it. I was driving my white Honda to work, and I think I'm on my white steed. Here's Prince Valiant going to do justice to the community on his white steed every morning. And I loved the work itself. I loved the mental challenges. I loved doing justice. I felt good about what I was doing every day. This was something I deeply loved. And I had a serious health issue come up. More than 10 years ago, it began. And it resulted in the fact that I won't get into the details of the health issue, but it was a serious and undiagnosed issue with my GI system that cannot be resolved and is just built into me. Also, because of that, that led to other health issues, including a couple of heart attacks that were, in effect, complications from that. It's a complicated story, so I won't get into it all. But I had to leave the DA's office right when all that was happening. You can't be a trial lawyer and have those kind of health problems.
Yeah.
And so I realized that, and I had to leave that job. Oof. And you could see, for an objectivist in particular, the passionate career purpose you have in your life is central to it. And I was going through a really, really, really difficult time. There's no question about it. And my dog passed away in my arms too, from a huge epileptic, an unforeseeable epileptic fit. And we're getting him to the vet, and he's dying in my arms. And then 2 days later, we find out our other dog has diabetes.
Oh.
This sweet little girl. I'm just so crushed at the vet. I tell the story of how, when I'm there crying about how, oh God, my life is all going to shit right now, is all I could feel at the time, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
In comes this guy on a wheelchair. He has no legs. He has no lower half of his body. He's got, the guy's massive upper body that he's made to compensate for, the giant muscles on his shoulders and arms, right? And he comes in a wheelchair with an ear-to-ear grin, smiling, just beaming with just pure, there's nothing like a face with the sparkling eyes, and the smile, is just pure, unadulterated joy. And here's this guy coming in happy like that. And he's an ex-Marine, and here comes his gray-haired dad coming in with him. He's just getting a checkup for one of his service dogs. I find out he's the miracle Marine who goes around to veterans, injured veterans, to help their spirits psychologically. And boy, is he the perfect person to do this. And I felt this, oh my God, I cannot cry in that man's presence. It's just like the tears just sucked back up into the tear ducts. I became, I guess all my macho innate social training or whatever kicked in. I just cannot cry in front of this man. Okay, it's just not right. And so but I had a chance in the waiting room to interact with him. And before it was all over, he was explaining what he was doing, and I was able to download a little bit about myself. I said, look, God, I'm feeling really, it shouldn't be a matter of comparison. I was telling him, why the hell am I even thinking comparison in this thing? On the other hand, I've had it rough, but not nearly so rough as you. And his last words to me, I'll never forget. Of course you have a right to cry. He said to me. And that had a huge impact on turning me around. There were other things. I self-consciously, from that moment forward, attended to self-care. I need to figure out a new purpose. First, I need to give myself slack for the trauma I've just been through in having to change my life purpose. Grieve it like a loss. Let yourself feel that loss. Yeah, you're depressed. You have a good reason to be depressed, sir, I would say to myself. And yeah, my life has changed in this totally unexpected way, and it's changing across the board so many aspects of my life. My health, what I can do, can't do, all kinds of things. I have to financially replan my life in various ways. So it was a huge thing. Cut yourself slack for what you're going through. And then, wait a minute here, say, I am still a capable person. There's lots of things I can do in this world. I'm not done doing even the things I want to do in this world. And with the help of my amazing wife, and with the help of my best friend, who happens to be a psychotherapist, they helped turn me around in various ways. But it was ultimately me. They could encourage it. They could help me. They could give me all the understanding. The people who loved me could give me the understanding I needed. But it was going to be me at the end of the day who had to turn it around.
Has to be. Yeah.
And it's a question of my focus, of getting myself out of that dark place. But I got myself out of what, for me, I know people, like I say, have suffered much darker places. But for me, it was a very dark, dark place. And at this point, I've completely turned it around. My health is infinitely better. I have a whole new purpose. Since that happened, I published Creating Christ, and I am actively promoting my work there. I'm working for Ayn Rand Centre UK, doing all kinds of work there. I'm doing literally hundreds of podcasts a year now, on talking about both objectivism and ancient history. And so now and I'm writing more books. So now I've completely turned it around. I have a purpose, and that was what did it. Is my own introspective efforts at thinking it through, assessing, allowing myself to grieve the actual loss that it was, assessing my existing values and virtues that I still knew I had out there, and reapplying them to the problem of my life. And I was lucky enough to have good, loving people who helped me do that.
That's
Was that
awesome. That's phenomenal. And I think it's the perfect place to stop. Before we go, though, is there some place people can find it? You just mentioned Ayn Rand UK. What's it called, so that people can
the
look you
Ayn
up?
Rand Centre UK is based out of London, and it is doing an amazing work. It's just simply called Ayn Rand Centre, and of course they misspell center R-E. Being those Brits, you know. The Ayn Rand Centre United Kingdom, based out of London. It started as a meetup group at a pub in London. But when
Wow.
COVID happened, they had to do their meetings, virtually. And so since they had Zoom meetings now, they figured, hey, let's expand because some people will go to the continent or America. So let's expand this to a worldwide audience. And since then, we've now developed a worldwide audience of young students of objectivism. And we do all kinds of stuff. We have free YouTube broadcast material every week, practically every day. We do a daily objective. On Wednesdays, Robert Nasser and I do an in-depth study of Dr. Peikoff's book, Keeping It Real. We've gone through all of Ayn Rand's essays, and there are all kinds of other features. If you subscribe and join and become a member for as low price, if I can say so, as £8 a month, you can subscribe and become a member, get all kinds of wonderful benefits. The Fountainhead Reading Club had Professor Shoshana Knapp, who teaches literature at the University of Virginia and teaches the Fountainhead at the university level. Lisa Van Dam, who runs one of the best private schools in the country, Van Dam Academy, who's taught it at the high school level, teaching the Fountainhead. Or on Sundays, we do in-depth, right now we're doing Leonard Peikoff's History of Philosophy course, and I'm lucky enough to lead the discussions there. So if you're a subscriber, you can join us on Sundays and actually participate and interact. We've done all of Peikoff's courses practically at this point, philosophy and physics, induction in philosophy and physics, objectivism by induction, the art of thinking, understanding objectivism, and we'll no doubt go through all those again. And those are all on tape. So if you join, you can catch up with all that material as well. So I urge people, we have people like Harry Binswanger, Leonard Peikoff has even appeared on our channel. So we have some of the best minds in objectivism talking about a great range of subjects, from literature to psychology to history to philosophy. And so I urge people to check out our work there, Ayn Rand Centre UK. It's a YouTube channel, easy to find. They've got a website, easy to find.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for being here. I hope you'll be our first third-time guest as well.
You're intelligent. You're friendly. I love your smile, and
Thank you.
ask really intelligent questions. So I would be honored to come back.
Thank you so much.
Future, sir.
Beautiful. All right. For now, I'm Michael Leibowitz. This is the Rational Egoist signing out. Remember, like, share, comment, subscribe. Until next time.